In 1991, a British soldier walked into an American command tent in Saudi Arabia, listened to a Delta Force briefing about hunting Scud missile launchers across the Iraqi desert, and quietly said the plan would get men killed. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He told the American commander that if his patrol was going to operate that way, the regiment would rather sit the war out. Then he walked out, climbed into a Land Rover, and drove into Iraq with his own people, on his own terms. That moment, captured in scattered memoirs and whispered between operators for decades, is the moment United States Special Forces realized something uncomfortable. The British Special Air Service, the unit Delta Force was literally modeled after, was still playing a completely different game. This is the story of how the two most lethal special operations communities in the world spent 40 years working side by side, and the moments American operators understood they were not equals, not in selection, not in doctrine, not in what they were willing to do when no one was watching. Let's start in the freezing dunes of western Iraq, January 1991. The first Gulf War is 6 days old. Saddam Hussein has just started firing Scud missiles into Israel, trying to drag Tel Aviv into the war and shatter the coalition arrayed against him. Every Scud launcher he fires from western Iraq is a strategic earthquake. American satellites can't find them. American F-15 fighters can't kill them on the ground. So the coalition turns to a quieter solution. Men with rifles walking among the launchers in the dark. The Americans send Delta Force. The British send the Special Air Service. They are operating in the same desert, hunting the same targets, with completely different philosophies about how to do it. The Delta Force teams move in helicopter-inserted columns with heavy fire support, robust communications, and a direct chain back to General Norman Schwarzkopf's headquarters. They want air cover. They want extraction on standby. They want eyes on. It is the American way. Overwhelming capability, redundant systems, an answer for every problem, and it is brilliantly effective. But the SAS columns operate differently. Half squadron, mobility groups, and stripped down Land Rovers, what they call Pink Panthers, painted in desert camouflage, bristling with machine guns and Milan anti-tank missiles. They go in dark. They stay in dark. They report on schedule, and they do not call for help unless men are dying. Some patrols operate for 43 straight days behind Iraqi lines without resupply from the air. They live on what they brought and what they can siphon from Iraqi trucks they ambush at night. And then there is Bravo 20. On January 22nd, 1991, an 8-man SAS foot patrol is inserted by Chinook helicopter into a featureless stretch of desert north of Baghdad. Their call sign is Bravo 20. Their commander is a sergeant named Stephen Mitchell, later known to the world by his pseudonym Andy McNabb. Their mission is to find and destroy mobile Scud launchers and to sever an underground fiber optic communications cable linking Baghdad to its forward forces. Each man is carrying roughly 210 pounds of equipment. They patrol on foot 20 kilometers across open desert in temperatures that drop to freezing at night. They do not have the satellite phones the American teams carry. They do not have on-call extraction. They have a rendezvous schedule, a Syrian border far to the west, and each other. Within 48 hours, a young Iraqi boy herding goats stumbles onto their hide. The patrol is compromised. What follows is one of the most legendary running gunfights in modern special operations history. The patrol splits. They are pursued by Iraqi regulars, militia, and eventually elements of the Republican Guard. 3 of the 8 men die in the desert. 4 are captured and tortured for weeks in Baghdad. Only one, Chris Ryan, escapes on foot. He walks roughly 300 kilometers across enemy territory to reach Syria. By the time he gets there, he has lost 40 pounds and cannot recognize his own face in a mirror. The American operators in Saudi Arabia hear the story almost in real time, and the thing that haunts them is not the failure. The failure is a soldier's nightmare anyone can imagine. What haunts them is that the SAS patrol never called for help. Even compromised, even surrounded, even dying, the men of Bravo 20 followed their training, and did not break protocol on a mission they considered already broken. One American Tier 1 officer reportedly said it like this: "We would have called for the cavalry the moment the kids saw us. They did not call anyone. They just started walking." That is the first crack. The first moment American special operators realized the SAS was not just trained differently, they were thinking differently. To understand why, you have to go back to the cold hills of the Brecon Beacons in central Wales. This is where SAS selection happens. It is, by reputation and by data, one of the most brutal selection courses in the world. Selection runs twice a year. It begins with hundreds of volunteers, all already serving British soldiers, many already paratroopers or Royal Marines. By the end of the 4 phases, 22 weeks later, fewer than 10% will pass. In some years, no one passes at all. The first phase, Hills, is what breaks most candidates. It is a series of forced marches across the Welsh mountains with progressively heavier loads. The famous test march, the Long Drag, sometimes called Endurance, is 64 kilometers of mountain terrain carrying around 65 pounds of kit plus a rifle, completed in 20 hours. The instructors do not encourage candidates. They do not motivate them. They sit at checkpoints, marking times, watching, saying almost nothing. This is by design. The SAS does not want soldiers who need to be inspired. They want soldiers who push themselves toward a destination, because that is who they are when no one is looking. When Delta Force was being designed in the late 1970s by Colonel Charlie Beckwith, an American officer who had served on exchange with the SAS in the 1960s, he modeled Delta selection directly on this Welsh template. He moved the mountains to Camp Dawson in West Virginia. He kept the long marches, he kept the silent instructors, and he was vocal about why. He had seen American Special Forces selection up close and decided it was not hard enough. He wanted soldiers who could function alone, in pain, in the dark, with no one telling them they were doing well. It worked. Delta Force became one of the most respected special missions units in the world. But here is the part the public does not often hear. Delta operators who later trained alongside the SAS came back and quietly admitted that even Beckwith's selection, even with all its borrowing, was not quite the same animal. The difference is hard to describe but easy to feel. American selection is a test. British selection is a culture. The Welsh Mountains are not a venue. They are a religion. Every SAS man who passes selection has walked those hills carrying that weight, and they know that every man next to them in the squadron has too. There is no shortcut, no recycle program, no waiver. You either did the long drag inside the time, or you went home. And going home is the operative phrase, because that brings us to one of the most defining cultural features of the regiment. In the British Special Air Service, an instructor can tell a candidate to leave at any moment. No reason given, no appeal. The famous phrase, repeated by former operators in countless interviews, is just 2 words: off the course. That is it. You pack your kit and you are gone by the end of the day. Sometimes a candidate has done nothing visibly wrong. They simply did not impress the directing staff, and the staff is trusted completely to make that call. American Special Forces selection has standardized scoring, written evaluations, appeals processes, instructor oversight committees. The SAS has the directing staff and their judgment, and the regiment trusts them. This is not bureaucracy versus chaos. This is 2 different philosophies of how you find a warrior. The Americans build a fair system. The British build a tribe. And when those 2 systems collided in the deserts of Iraq, the result was friction. But before we get to the friction, you need to understand one more piece of the SAS legend. The moment the world first saw what these men could actually do, May the 5th, 1980. London, Prince's Gate, the Iranian embassy. 6 armed gunmen from an Iranian Arab separatist group have taken 26 hostages, including a British police officer inside the embassy. The siege is 6 days old. The country is watching live on television. The negotiations have just collapsed. One hostage has already been executed and dumped on the embassy steps. The Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher has made the call. The regiment is going in. What the world sees next is roughly 17 minutes of televised broadcast assault. Black-clad figures rappel down the embassy's rear walls. Frame charges blow out windows. Stun grenades fill the building with white smoke. The SAS clears the embassy room by room. The action is fast, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. 5 of the 6 terrorists are killed. The 6th surrenders by hiding among the hostages and is later identified and arrested. 19 hostages walk out alive. It is the public birth of the modern counterterrorism era. Every special operations unit in the Western world watches that footage and rewinds it. Delta Force is roughly 2 years old at this point. They are still finding their identity, and they are watching their British mentors execute a counterterrorism operation on live television flawlessly while the world looks on. After Prince's Gate, the SAS is no longer a secret regiment. It is a brand, a myth, and the men inside it do not love that, because the regiment has always operated best in the dark. By the time the United States and Britain began operating jointly at scale in Afghanistan after September 11th, both communities had decades of mutual respect and a fair amount of unspoken rivalry. They had trained together. They had shared techniques. American operators rotated through Hereford. British operators trained at Fort Bragg. The relationship was deep, but it was about to be tested in a way neither side fully expected. In the months after the World Trade Center attacks, American Joint Special Operations Command moved into Afghanistan with overwhelming force. Delta Force, DevGru, Army Rangers, Air Force combat controllers, and a sprawling network of CIA paramilitary operators flooded into the country. The British sent a contingent of SAS and Special Boat Service operators that, by comparison, was tiny. A few troops, a few dozen men. The British contribution was, on paper, almost a rounding error, but almost immediately the size mismatch stopped mattering, because the SAS detachment was integrated into Task Force KBAR, a joint special operations task force operating in southern and eastern Afghanistan, and the British operators began doing things the Americans noticed. There is a story from this period that has been told several different ways. The version told by former American operators in books and interviews goes roughly like this. A target package comes down for a raid on a suspected Al-Qaeda facility. The American team plans the assault with their typical thoroughness: helicopter insertion, multiple stacks, overwatch, air cover on station. The plan is solid. The British liaison officer, an SAS major, reviews the plan and asks politely why so many men are needed for a target this size. The Americans explain redundancy. The major nods. He says nothing for the rest of the briefing. The next night, before the joint operation kicks off, the SAS troop runs its own reconnaissance and discovers the target has already moved. They confirm the new location. They request and receive permission to handle it themselves. 4 British operators go in on foot at night with no air cover and no overwatch. They walk into the compound, neutralize the targets, gather intelligence, and walk back out. The American team is still in their briefing room when word comes through that the mission is complete. The reaction inside the American command, depending on whose memoir you read, was somewhere between admiration and quiet fury. Admiration because the result was clean. Fury because the SAS had, in effect, said, "No thank you, we will handle this ourselves while you finish your slideshow." This was the pattern. Not arrogance exactly, something deeper. The SAS believed that the right answer to most special operations problems was fewer men, less noise, and more time. The American Tier 1 units, working inside a much larger system, tended to bring more men, more support, and tighter timelines. Both philosophies produced spectacular successes, but on joint missions, the philosophies sometimes collided. And then came the order that gave this video its title. There is no single confirmed source for the exact incident, but multiple former operators in books like Mark Urban's writing on Task Force Black have described variations of the same scene. During the height of the Iraq surge, around 2006 and 2007, American JSOC commanders were running an industrial scale night raid program targeting Al Qaeda in Iraq. The pace was extraordinary. Some nights, multiple raids per task force, multiple task forces working in parallel. General Stanley McChrystal was driving the tempo, and the tempo was crushing the enemy. The British SAS, embedded inside Task Force Black, was running alongside this program, but the SAS leadership was uncomfortable with certain mission parameters. The intelligence on some targets was thinner than the regiment was used to working with. The pace meant less rehearsal, less reconnaissance, less of the careful preparation the regiment considered standard. And on one occasion, according to multiple accounts, a senior SAS officer told an American counterpart that if the mission profiles continued in their current form, he would, quote, send his men home. Send them home. 2 squadrons of operators, the most experienced in the British military, packed up and gone. Not because they were scared, because they were not willing to operate at a standard they considered unacceptable. That was the leverage. That was the line. The American command reportedly was stunned. Inside JSOC, there is a culture of relentless mission tempo, of saying yes, of finding a way. The idea that a foreign Tier 1 unit would simply withdraw because they did not like the planning standard was, to many American officers, almost incomprehensible, but the threat was real, and it forced a conversation. Mission planning protocols inside the Joint Task Force were adjusted. The SAS stayed. The campaign continued, and the relationship deepened, painfully, into something stronger than what came before. What this moment crystallized for everyone involved was a fundamental truth about the SAS. The regiment will not be assimilated. It will work with you, fight beside you, and bleed with you. But it will not pretend it does not have its own standards, its own doctrine, and its own command culture, even when the operational stakes are immense, even when the politics are uncomfortable, even when the Americans outnumber them 10-1. Now, let us talk about why the SAS could even make a threat like that and have it taken seriously. Because behind that line was an entire culture that American operators kept running into and kept being surprised by. Start with how the regiment treats rank. Inside the SAS, the non-commissioned officers run the regiment. The officers come and go. Most officers serve one tour in the SAS, 3 to 5 years, and then return to their parent regiment. The senior NCOS, the staff sergeants and warrant officers who have served 15 or 20 years in the regiment, are the institutional memory. They are the ones who decide what works and what does not. They are the ones who develop the techniques. What this means in practice is that an SAS troop sergeant has a level of operational authority that would be almost unimaginable in an American Tier 1 unit. He can disagree with the mission plan from a senior officer, and his disagreement will be heard. He can tell an officer that a mission is poorly conceived, and his judgment will be weighed seriously. The American system has a much sharper officer-enlisted divide, even inside Delta Force, where the culture is famously flat. The SAS divide is sometimes barely visible at all. Then there is the equipment philosophy. American Tier 1 units have access to almost unlimited budgets. The kit is incredible. Custom rifles, custom optics, custom plate carriers, custom communications gear. The level of personalization on a Delta operator's kit is extraordinary. The SAS, working with a much smaller budget, is famously frugal. The kit is good. It is not the most expensive available, but it is selected by men who have used it under fire and rejected what does not work. There is a phrase inside the regiment: train hard, fight easy, and it extends to equipment. The SAS does not trust gear. It has not personally broken. Then there is the question of how each unit thinks about violence. Delta Force is, by doctrine, a precision instrument. Its mission profile is hostage rescue, counterterrorism, and high-value target capture or kill. The unit is trained for surgical operations. The same is largely true of the SAS, but the regimental culture carries something older, something from the Second World War origins under David Sterling in the North African desert. The SAS was born in raids, long range, deep penetration. Behind the lines, raids where small groups of men destroyed enemy aircraft on the ground, blew up fuel dumps, and disappeared back into the desert before anyone knew they had been there. That heritage is still alive. The SAS, even today, has a temperament that is comfortable operating without a safety net. American operators who worked alongside the regiment often described this temperament as eerie. Not cold exactly, calm, quiet. The willingness to walk into a room knowing the math may not work out and to walk in anyway without bravado. There is a story from the Iraq campaign told secondhand in special operations circles about a joint room entry during a raid in Baghdad. The American stack entered first, cleared the front rooms. The SAS pair came in behind. In a back room, they encountered a barricaded shooter. The American doctrine in that moment was to pull back, throw a flashbang, reset, and re-enter. The SAS pair simply went through the door. They closed the distance in seconds, and the room was clear before the flashbang would have detonated. The American team leader, recounting it later, said it was the most disciplined act of controlled aggression he had ever seen, and it was, he said, completely terrifying. That is the gap in a sentence. The Americans do everything by the book. The SAS wrote a book and then learned when to put it down. By the late 2000s, after years of joint operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the two communities had blended in ways that would have been unimaginable in the 1980s. American operators had been embedded in SAS squadrons. British operators had served full rotations inside Delta. Joint capture or kill operations had been run hundreds of times under General McChrystal's task force structure. The mutual respect was real, earned in blood, and bigger than the cultural differences. But the cultural differences never fully closed, and that, more than anything, is what defines the relationship. American operators came back from joint tours with stories about how their British counterparts moved, talked, prepared, decompressed. Many of them quietly adopted SAS habits: the careful, almost paranoid attention to mission rehearsal, the willingness to walk away from a bad plan, the flat command culture. The phrase, "who dares wins," started appearing in American special operations writing. The hill walking selection model spread further. Even the beard culture, the famously non-regulation appearance of special operators in Iraq and Afghanistan, had echoes of the SAS approach. Look like operators, not soldiers. And on the British side, the regiment quietly absorbed lessons too. American capability with drones, signals intelligence, fusion centers, and global communications was unmatched. The SAS learned to operate inside that capability without losing its identity. The result, by the middle of the Iraq surge, was the most lethal special operations partnership in modern military history. Task Force Black, working alongside its American counterparts, was running hundreds of operations a year against Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the impact on the enemy network was devastating. But underneath all of that effectiveness, the original divide never disappeared. American officers who served on those task forces will tell you in private that the SAS taught them how to be patient, taught them how to walk into a room without overwhelming force, taught them that sometimes the smallest team is the right team and that the loudest answer is rarely the best one. And SAS officers, in their own way, will tell you that the Americans taught them how to scale, how to use industrial strength intelligence, how to move at a tempo that grinds an enemy network into dust, how to bring the full weight of a superpower to bear on a fight. But the soul of the regiment, the thing that made an SAS officer willing to look at a JSOC commander and say, "Send my men home," that part was not assimilated. That part is what makes the SAS the SAS. It is what made Bravo 20 walk into the Iraqi desert without a satellite phone and refuse to call for help when the math went bad. It is what brought the assault teams down the walls of the Iranian embassy in 1980 with 17 minutes of cold precision broadcast to the world. It is what walked 4 men into a compound in Afghanistan on foot in the dark while the Americans were still planning. It is what makes the regiment, more than 80 years after David Sterling sketched out the idea in a Cairo hospital bed, the unit that every other unit measures itself against. The United States Special Forces did not realize the SAS was playing by different rules in a single moment. They realized it slowly, over decades, across deserts and mountains, and the quiet hallways of joint command posts. They realized it every time a British operator did something quieter, smaller, and more lethal than the plan called for. They realized it every time a senior NCO with a Welsh accent looked at a beautifully briefed mission and said, with respect, no. And the strange thing, the thing that makes the story matter, is that the Americans never resented the lesson. They studied it, they borrowed from it, they sent their best men to learn from the regiment. And the relationship between the two communities today is, by every account, one of the closest in the military world, because in the end, both sides know the truth. The British Special Air Service is the original, the unit every modern special operations force, including Delta Force, traces its lineage back to. And the Americans, for all their resources and all their reach, understood early that the regiment they had copied still had something they could not buy: the discipline to walk away, the patience to wait, the confidence to send their own men home if the math was wrong, and the quiet, deeply unsettling willingness to handle the worst nights of war with the smallest possible footprint and the steadiest possible hands. That is what the SAS is. That is what they have always been. And that is the moment, somewhere in a desert tent or a Baghdad command post or a Welsh mountainside, when American Tier 1 operators looked across at their British counterparts and understood, finally, what they were really dealing with. Not allies playing the same game, allies playing a different one, and winning it on their own terms.